good, okay. Okay, we open the meeting in exec session, so we'll continue here with the meeting. Got some great shots of some great projects going on, and Maureen's going to take us through those in a second. So I'll start off by passing the meeting over to Dr. McCursey to give us some highlights around the district.
Sure, thank you. I'll start off with, as in each meeting, we're calling some good news district highlights. I think our student board reps will pick up on a little detail if I leave it at least several, but I have 3 highlights. Then I'll go into a COVID update as it's listed in the agenda. It'll be a little bit longer. But first off, and I want to make sure I get the last name correct, but Oliver Fuchs, a senior, this is quite an amazing accomplishment, was among 300 scholars in the Regeneron talent search for his project, quote, examining the associations between historical redlining maps and asthma emergency department visits across New York City. Now, money doesn't matter, but he did win a $2,000 scholarship with this and has been chosen as a finalist in the STS competition, through which he may receive up to $25,000 and a chance to win a $250,000.
Wow.
So this is quite a significant door to walk into, well-earned, well-deserved, and certainly a great example of the talents all across the Hastings district. Going to the athletic side of the ledger, Josh Thigpen, another senior, was nominated for LOHUD's Player of the Week. You all know what LOHUD stands for his skills on the basketball court, and the voting may have closed. He was in a close second. It's still open.
I'm sorry, that was a misprint. I don't want to interrupt you, but it's open until 2 p.m. tomorrow.
So you can, I'm a Chicagoan, you can actually vote early and often in this
right.
to quote my hometown. And so you can vote early and often for Josh. He was running at about 39% of the vote. The leader was at 40% of the vote.
Oh.
And as someone said, it should be no contest because it's in the 3 games he's featured for is well over 100 points he scored.
Wow.
The top vote getter from a certain district called Suffern was maybe had scored some 35 points, but who's counting? But the detail matters. Career high 48 points as they beat Hamilton in overtime, then added 26 points against rival Dobbs Ferry with a game-ending dunk, and I was in eyesight and earsight, but eyesight of this most beatific smile, and it was beatific as he dunked and kind of floated off with this, and I got to see that smile, and it was just a special thing. And then he followed up with 27 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 blocks on Sunday against Briarcliff in the slam dunk contest at Iona College. And lastly, Mrs. Maureen Bassman has been named Athletic Secretary of the Year for Section 1 Athletics. And so we're all very excited about that. So, and you can provide more detail, please, when you get your chance on the student pieces, if not more. Let me go to a place that we're all don't want to talk about, and that's COVID. I'm going to do several things. I'm going to give some updates on that as we heard them this morning. Every Monday morning, the supers gather virtually with George Latimer and his team. But the data is, as he explained this morning, I'll use round figures. Then talk about, in a little more detail, what the superintendents are doing in this county, because they really are advocating hard. They really are, and I want to give you some examples of that. And some of that was right up until late today. Then I want to give you Hastings data, which did go out while we were sitting here. It's a 4-day count we just had, so the numbers are bigger, but it is a 4-day count. Talk a bit about test to stay, and then an issue around kind of our medical. We have some families appealing for medical approvals on being remote, and we're actually going to be fairly strict on that, but I just want to do a little detail on that. And then lastly, end on a really, really good note, which is do a shout out for our nurses. And I'll come back to that. But first off, the data is not good as we think about the county. We're at some 36,000 active cases right now in Westchester. That's up over 9,000 since just a week ago. It's nearly all Omicron. Hospitalizations are now up to about 585, probably 600 soon, and that'll be the highest point since the pandemic started. Fatalities, which sadly we do need to talk about, so far in January it's 37, according to Mr. Latimer. It was 60 in December, 7 in November. So you can see that this rate's also increasing. What we do know is that if you're vaccinated, the effects of Omicron are by and large minimal. And because of the high rate, many people are learning that firsthand. Having said all that in terms of that data, Mr. Latimer is saying there are no plans right now to do anything but stay open. The county wants to stay open, the schools want to stay open, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that happens. Second big point is, I've said it before, I want to give a little more detail. The superintendents across Westchester County, with the lead of several, particularly Eric Byrne and General Maya, are incredibly well organized, incredibly active, and very specific. So we meet every Monday morning. They really are, politely so, but very much do push it with George Latimer and his team. And they were pushing hard today on Please Westchester, do 5 days. It's been 10 days for everyone but essentials, but across the state that's varied. So particularly for districts bordering another county, it's gotten extra confusing because they've shifted to the 5-day there. So it looks like, and there's a memo out tonight, the main point of the memo that we can make sense of is they will be shifting to 5 days here in Westchester County per the state. But give us about 24 hours to really make that formal, because you have to do a little bit of checking on a document that some of you knew about even before the meeting, but they just land literally before I walked down here. And some of that's due to the advocacy of the superintendents. The other big thing is we're pushing hard to stop contact tracing. We're pushing hard to stop contact tracing. Connecticut has gone down that path. Massachusetts has gone down that path. The Connecticut path is a complicated one, so a number of districts actually have not pursued that. My own home district, where my daughters are, has not pursued it. Today I've been talking to the superintendent about why they didn't and what are they doing instead. So even if they don't pursue it, they are getting, formally, they are getting much more flexibility. But we're very worried, frankly, that the amount of contact tracing that now has to go on as the numbers go up, the returns on that are minimal. And I'm worried, as others are, that it's going to wear out our nurses, wear out our principals and assistant principals, and may be one of the things that backs us into remote. So we're pushing hard to get that. And the other thing is we want a more consistent return to school protocol. So it's very clear, this is some of, in this room, have struggled with. I mean, we as administrators and nurses struggle with how to be consistent on what the return to school is. So that was the verbal today, but even beyond the verbal, there's a 6-part letter that's been drafted, worked over a great deal, that would, as George Latimer said, please send it to the governor, send it to the director of public health for the state, and send it to the county. But that's to advocate for weekly testing for everybody, potentially a PCR or rapid, so the supers are debating a bit. Do they want to be locked in on a PCR or give us flexibility? Second, eliminate contact tracing. A lot of discussion today. The early draft picked up from Connecticut, which may be why a lot of districts have not done the contact tracing there, or have not agreed to eliminate it, because you have to be in a district where 85% of all staff and students are part of surveillance testing. 85%. That's an incredibly high bar. So early draft, we had it in. By later in the day, that 85% was gone, and it's at least saying, okay, NYSDOH, you tell us what that standard is. I think that's one reason Greenwich, didn't agree to go into the program, because how do you get to 85%? And that's a high vaccination community. But the elimination of contact tracing. Third in the letter is masking metrics. Give us metrics on when we can begin to pull back on masks. Fourth, please give us statewide regulations and guidelines, and insist that they be statewide. Give us room in each district in some sense, but this county-by-county approach is just getting extra confusing. Additional point from above on the verbal, but a return to school protocol for staff and students. And then lastly, increase access to vaccinations and boosters. Please give us all that. So the reason I'm spending a little time on that is because I want you all to know that as frustrated as you are as board members and the community that's listening, your superintendents, and I want the nurses to know that. I stopped by Hillside the other day, Thursday, just to go in and sort of be a tall cheerleader for the nurses. And I probably hadn't been in enough, but it was helpful to them to hear that we know what a struggle this is, and we're trying to advocate. The Hastings data, large point 3 here, if you're following my outline from earlier, we're still at about 10, 11, 12 new cases a day. So if you look at what just came out, it's about 38, 39, 40 over about a 4-day count. So if you think about that in terms of the county data, going up by 9,000 in a week, and you can kind of do the math, we're still doing pretty well because our daily rate, new cases active cases each day is about the same every day. And some families have said, could you give us the longitudinal? Could you give us the historic? Fine. My view is what matters most on how we're doing is that day-to-day change. And you figure every now 5 to 10 days, it all rolls over, right? So it really is important is, are we seeing suddenly 20 or 30 new cases a day? So today's chart, for example, if that had been a 24-hour and it jumped from 10 to 30, we'd have to be thinking a little bit differently about what we're doing. That's, I'm both telling you what the data is, you see it just went out, but also why we're not going to be chasing longitudinal or data. Test to stay, it's a key part of what we're doing. Thank you, Maureen and nurses, for working on that. It's by and large been very, very positive for us. Not all the districts are doing it. We're still one of the outliers on that. So in the super conversations, there are several of us who can say it actually is, by and large, a gain. More children stay in school and more staff can work because of test to stay. I mean, you are going to pick up some students or staff who, in that 7-day period, do test positive. That's why we've stayed with an everyday testing regime with it. We were given the flexibility by the state to go every other day.
I just got an email saying that the volume, I guess, on the live stream, so you turn up the volume on the live stream so people at home are not hearing it too loud. Sorry.
Okay,
You're
that's
sharing a
okay.
lot of good info
Yeah.
and they can't hear you.
So I won't restart, but we'll figure that out. But the test to stay is very important. We've got the extra help from the test provided. This will probably help if I put this close. We have the help of the state-provided test, which gives us a supply. You may see in the media that the supply that came from the state, some amount of that was going to expire in January. We've learned, fortunately, that most of what we receive from the state is not expiring in January. So we're good with that. If we did have tests that were going to expire in January, we're not going to use them. Maureen and I were talking today about a way to make sure we aren't sitting on unused tests, because the last thing I'd want to do is be part of that conversation as to why didn't we help distribute tests and then didn't get used. Lastly, I won't belabor this. It's been a small number of families, we understand it, who've said medically my child cannot be in school right now. Please give us a reason to be on remote. We work very closely with our medical advisors and other medical public health experts on this. The reality is there are very, very, as severe as COVID can be, there are very, very few children who would qualify to not be in school. And so we've got a process now in place that we'll use, but it's a small, fortunately, we have a very small number of families who would need this and will be very supportive and all the rest, but we want children in school. And the other reality is, as we are live streaming, it's not an interactive remote process, and that's true with everybody doing this now. So we don't want families going into a remote mode where they think there's going to be a lot of pedagogy, and it's minimal. And so that's another reason to work with families to say, if indeed it's healthy for your child to be in school, there's a big academic reason for it. So we're working on that. Lastly, our nurses. And I can't remember if I said this last time I was with the board, but maybe with a few other people. And I know I'm in a public mic, which maybe now people can hear. But the nurses here are superb. And What I'm reluctant to say, but I'm going to say it, is I hear some of my colleagues in other districts not speaking so positively. And the nurses here deserve only positive. And if people are frustrated with them about their decisions, they're caught in the middle. They're caught between a state and a county, and then you as parents. And so administrators are used to grief. We're paid to get grief. That's our job. We have to smile, with the grief. Nurses don't deserve it. And so I just would ask that we all do all we can to support them, because I got to tell you, particularly over the holiday break, when I was on the phone constantly, several times a day, with Joanne and others, and now spending more time up at Hillside, it's a rare group that we have here. So I just hope we can all do what we can to support them, and if there's and say to families, hey, if you're frustrated, please, that they're just there in the middle. They are caught in the middle on this, working like crazy. So that is my update, my report. There may be some questions. We did get, last thing, and I've been reading it during some other meetings, it literally just landed at about 6 o'clock tonight. Some parts of what the state has said to us are good. I think the 5-day is what we've been asking for. There's some things here that goes backwards, though. So that's what we've got to figure out, what the state's really saying. So, for example, it's saying here, if you're fully vaccinated, away from school, you need to be quarantining. We've not been doing that. And so there's some wires got crossed here. But I think the main thing we care about is the state is saying we can all do the 5-day. We need about 24 hours to figure this out, and then we'll announce it. Because if we took this memo whole cloth, we'd be in a few areas going backwards, which we don't want to do. So let me stop and see if there are questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
So it's quite technical, but I'm thinking of this in a very holistic approach towards fighting a virus that is impacting our lives. And you mentioned something about the contact tracing that I agree with you that with the rate at which people are getting infected, using it as a form to quarantine others may not be a good, probably a good way to be doing that. But I was hoping that that process, because it's already been stated, can serve as a way to let people just be informed, so that when they are sniffing, they know that, oh, I should check it. It may not be the flu, it may not be a common cold, just as a way of FYI, but not as a measure for quarantining. So that's what I would, because we are hoping, and I also agree with you 100% with state guideline, because although Hastings, from the data, 99% of us are vaccinated, according to the data, which was last year, which might have increased, who knows? We are not in a vacuum. we are going to the real other parts of the state. So I think a state guideline is really helpful to try to get close to some form of herd immunity, because I think with the TTS, it's going to be helpful, because again, if our bodies are serving as a host, because there's no way of knowing if this virus is still replicating, it may get mutants that may be dangerous, and there's no way of knowing if we are still throwing caution to the wind, so to speak. We are lucky that the Omicron is not deadly, but it's extremely contagious. But what if we keep giving our bodies as hosts to the virus to keep dividing, and then it forms mutants that are dangerous? Then it becomes an issue. So I'm just hoping that that could be factored into the decision making.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at, what Tony Jones in Greenwich sent to me today, along kind of just to me, but I then kicked it. She said I kicked it to all the Westchester supers. She's the super in Greenwich where they didn't opt in to the contact tracing out, if that makes sense, right? And one of the things they are doing is doing a class-wide note. So if there's a positive case, do the class-wide note. That's a much bigger system, 17 buildings, 9,000 students, a little different situation, but ratio-wise, it's kind of the same. I mean, in the sense of number of staff to the situation. So But so I think very simply put, they're finding a way still to communicate out that you've been in the midst of a positive. But we'll have to see, because if we still have to, quarantine if you're unvaccinated and all the rest, we do have to sort through that. So we need the information to flow, but the reality is we only have so many people now who can contact trace. The county can't keep up. And when it's on us, then, it's pushed out a lot of other work.
I just want to point out, you probably remember, but in the meeting in December, you mentioned that the entire nation of South Africa decided mid-December to discontinue contact tracing for that very reason. Just wasn't a good use of resources.
Yeah, no, and that's very well put. And I think some states around us have tracked that and have picked it up, so now we're hoping that we can get there in New York State.
I just want to thank you and the supers for doing your best to make sure that the schools stay open. When I read about what's happening around the country and school districts shutting down, I appreciate everything you're doing to make sure that our kids get to stay in school.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And the nurses are incredible.
Yeah. Well, the reason we're able to do it, it's the teachers are being patient. Dare I mention Chicago? And I did a lot of work on Chicago unions and school reform. It was a big part of my life, frankly. So I'm like, oh my goodness, please. But we're not there right now. And I think, and then we have some ideas that Maureen has about how to provide other assurances to our staff. But the thank yous aren't. I appreciate. I'll take it as a plural. I just stand here, but it's the team doing this. They're the ones showing up and doing the work.
And then I just have a question or request. I think that sometimes when people hear like 30 people have got it, 30 seems like a large number. But when you understand that the percentage is actually like 0.8%, it suddenly puts it in a very different light.
Right.
And so maybe like the percentages versus the whole numbers can be helpful.
Yeah, that's actually a really good thought. Because if you do the straight math, it's 10 to 12 to 15 a day, multiply that by about 7, and subtract that out of your denominator, you're still you're at a really not a big percent.
Right, still tiny.
Yeah, and then you say, gosh, for 90% being, even if it's as much as 90% healthy can be in school, would you stop school?
Right.
Now that we know what we know.
Right.
Right.
Exactly, and I think that helps the community see like, 95% of people in schools are not infected, so we should keep it open.
Right.
So anyway, thank you.
Great, well, yeah, thank you, as everyone has said. Okay, let's move on to other things non-COVID, and pass the meeting over to Melissa Szymanski to talk about the.
Well, good evening, everyone. So not only are we open during this pandemic, we are also continuing forward with our continuous improvement efforts. So the first is the technology plan development. And prior to the break, Maureen and I began to draft the physical plan using the input of the committee that we have. And last week, we finalized a parent focus group and a student focus group. The participants were initially solicited through a survey that was pushed to the high school student distribution group and also to the broader Hastings community. We had responses from 10 students and 28 parents who were interested in participating. And we selected 7 students and 7 parents from the list of those who indicated interest, and those people were selected using a random number generator. And for those whom were not selected, we asked them to submit any input that they may have via email so that we still wanted to keep those lines of communication open. But we did logistically need to keep those focus groups small to allow for a really effective and efficient dialogue process. So the focus groups are going to convene tomorrow afternoon. Also, we pushed out a faculty survey. So not only do we have our committee, we also recruited some feedback from the faculty. And we've collated that and developed some themes based on questions that we've asked that are also guiding the input of that technology plan development. Tri-State Steering Committee. So the Tri-State Steering Committee has been meeting on an ongoing basis to continue working on logistics for our March Tri-State visit, which is focused on collaboration. And at our most recent meeting, the team began to identify individuals for interviews within faculty stakeholder groups. And also we will be identifying participants in the parent community and the board as well. So that it is a 360 approach to how we're looking at our district. Our DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we had some positive press for Hastings. So you may have seen the Rivertown Enterprise article on December 17th, which celebrated our efforts in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It referenced our 3-year plan. It talked about some very specific things that Dr. Janice Mateo Toledo's been involved in, and our philosophy around ensuring culturally responsive pedagogies and working with the state roadmap, as well as faculty input. So we're very happy to be positioned as regional leaders in this area, which is fantastic. I'd like to also extend my congratulations to Oliver Fuchs, who again was named as one of the top 300 Regeneron Science Talent Search scholars. And just to provide a little bit more information about that, the Regeneron STS recognizes and empowers the most promising young scientists in the United States who are creating the ideas and solutions that solve our most urgent challenges. So there were this year 1,805 students who applied to the talent search. So again, kudos to Oliver, and we wish him all the best in potentially becoming one of the finalists, the top 40 in the nation, and that announcement will come not too far from now, January 20th, 2022. So that is it for me this evening.
Thank you.
Melissa, can I just ask you a quick question? Do you have a facilitator who's running those focus groups on technology?
Yes, Maureen and I are running them, actually. Yes, we're working with some colleagues from LYRIC, the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center, who are supporting us with the work of the Technology Committee in general. We have actually worked with them around our focus group questions. We've tapped in, actually, we've tapped into some focus group research in that area to figure out how to best structure our questions. But direct facilitation is going to be happening with both Maureen and myself, and we bring that back then again to the committee.
And is it, I know that you used a random number generator, but were you able to make sure that you had like maybe special ed parents or students?
We did. We actually didn't ask for specific qualifiers other than school building when we pushed out to the community. And we actually did. And so when the spreadsheet, the process was, so based on the respondents, I was able with a Google form to push out a spreadsheet that basically coded people by building if they had a student in one building or another building, so that we wanted to make sure that there was representation from across the district. And so when we did the selection process, when we ordered and we did the polls, we made sure anyone who had a Hillside student was represented in this pool. In fact, a Farragut student and a Hastings High School student. So that was taken into account.
Thanks.
Maureen, I think we've got some good pictures.
Yes, so I'll start off tonight with my capital update, and as I've been doing the last few weeks, I think pictures say more than I could ever say, so we'll just kind of just update you as I just want to set up my computer so I can see a little bit better. So again, the first photograph here is the continuation of the Hillside edition. Again, this is work that's been occurring over the last few weeks. You can now, as each week goes by, we're seeing really the finishing of that, and that's shot, of course, of the all-purpose room. So they're priming and painting the walls. And then in this next shot here, again, the continuation of that exterior facade, framing, and installing the concrete panels. The outside of this building had a very, has a really complicated, beautiful, but, it was a lot of work that went into putting the exterior of that building together. So continuing on with that. I think this week, I mean, there's been a couple things that we had hoped to get done over break, but they were pushed back a bit, but we're still overall on schedule. The next piece here you see is the start framing and Auditorium ceilings, and the picture on the right is another large milestone that we hit, to install the kitchen hood, because, some of these particular items are longer lead time, so that was both delivered and installed, so we were happy with that. And then the walk-in freezer for this space, I believe, is being delivered this week, and then those are the two larger pieces of equipment, and the remainder will follow, but those were kind of key things to get installed and inspected. Now we're finally going to show you a couple of pictures of middle school auditorium. Here on the left, you can see where, again, because of where the construction is located, we had to have a crane pick, bring in all the new ductwork. A lot of this room, although it's going to be a large cosmetic lift in the room, a lot of the work also was in the ductwork and updating, the air handlers, central air and all that. And that actually was a lot of the work they've been doing thus far. So you can see there them hoisting those onto the ceiling. Now here, and again, these pictures, you really, I was up in the space, it actually already, these pictures here really don't do it justice. If you kind of are in the space and you were in it prior to the work being done, you could really start to appreciate it. So you can see here where the entire walls, everything is being redone, the ceiling, everything, and where there's a few places in which they haven't yet, redone the ceiling, and you're like, oh yeah, like huge difference, like everything's brand new. In some of these pictures, you can kind of see there's a tremendous amount of new lighting, both stage lighting, but just lighting for the space. That was a large piece of the work that, just a brand new kind of lighting design in there. So it really is quite beautiful. And again, I was really, when I went the other day, I was really impressed with what I saw. And that work is just continuing on. So I'm sure even since these pictures were taken, there's been a lot more accomplished.
Maureen, can I just ask,
Sure.
because I've never seen it, is it smaller or bigger than the regular auditorium?
Oh, the high school, yeah, no, it's smaller. So what's interesting about this space, well, it's smaller in terms of being the seating capacity is about half. It's roughly about 50%. The room itself, the ceilings are so high. I don't know, or at least it feels like it is. I don't know if it's just the light that comes into that room. But it is a really beautiful space, and it'll be, it wouldn't replace, needing a large auditorium, like if there's a large show or something, that it would still, more than likely need to still occur in the high school auditorium. This space was really designed to be a multi-function space. Yes, it can host some performances, but it is also going to be used much more during the day as a learning space. It could fit two grade levels, like so you could have 5th and 6th grade go, like just even if there was some type of presentation during the day. There's a lot of opportunities it presents, and then there's a lot of other space that even beyond the seating space that can be used, like as an example, when they do the dancing at Fifth Rose, using that as an example, like that could also occur there. So that's not the only reason we did it, but the space is going to be outfitted with like all brand new AV, audio visual tech. It actually has a, and you can't see it in this picture, there's a tech booth in the back now, like built in the back of the room. So similar to how the high school auditorium is, and the idea is that, I'm sure that teachers may have, maybe we'll see more performances where grade level teacher, I'm just throwing this out. But, like different things that can occur. So it will, any type of space, and I think although it's located in the middle school, of course, they have first dibs on the space. The space is really for the entire Farragut complex. It's a space that could host teacher training, right, Melissa? Like you now have a space that could fit pretty much your entire faculty. It's going to have all the different, abilities, like just like when people write flexible options in there. There's also going to be there's closets where they have flexible furniture. So it really was designed with this idea of being used for a variety of ways. So.
What's the seating capacity there, Maureen?
I think it's about 200. It might be a little bit less than 200. The actual fixed seats, because of course bringing it up to code, and,
Right.
Things for people bigger than this, you know,
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
old seats, but you need like 3 seats to get me in there. But now also with, you know, it's ADA compliance and all that, so I want to say the fixed seating is, might be like 170 or so, but the idea, we have all this other flex seating because we didn't want to lose all the floor space in the
Right.
front. So that's where you kind of get the 2 grade levels, that's
Right.
what we did. Because I think the actual fire, you know, up there might be like, it would fit 2 grade levels, so it's probably like 300 people can, you know, theoretically.
Right,
be
because it's
spaced
more of a
on top.
trek to get there too, just like
It
the
is.
access of getting to the top of the buildings is
Yeah. They
way
actually
different
did-
than getting to the high school.
Yeah, I mean, this one you have to take the elevator, I mean, there is
Right.
an elevator access to it, which actually they, even when you go upstairs, now they kind of leveled it out. It's nice to kind of make it much more, you know, accommodating for those who may need to use the elevator to get up to the space. So yes, it would not be ideal if you were having, you know, all those people, but I do
Right.
think it's an additional space. I envision it being used, you know, I think it'll be used quite a bit, but certainly one of the biggest times I think it's gonna be used, because now, we didn't have that space the way it's functioning now, it will be used during the day. I think a lot, you know, it may be that, you know, of course, it'll be different periods, different teachers, but again, with this idea that both high school, middle school, and faculty and whomever can use the space. Yes.
Sorry, I thought you were done, but I can see there are more slides. Two quick questions. So, I know you already did this, but can you give a refresher of what the rooms are in this building in terms of the function that we have in mind, or it's not set in stone yet?
Oh, you mean for this particular room?
For the building. Like, how many classrooms are we envisioning? I mean, like, I know we did that
Oh,
before.
no,
it
no,
got
we're
built.
talking about, are we talking about Hillside now?
Hillside, correct.
Oh, Hillside, so Hillside, we're just looking currently at the middle school, but on the previous slide, the Hillside addition adds 4 additional classrooms to the existing, in the addition, it includes 4 classrooms and a cafetorium space. But by also adding that cafetorium space, you know, beyond the 4 classrooms we're adding, that then frees up the existing cafe and some other spaces then that will then, the idea is that the libraries, the current library in Hillside will then move to that, which will then help us create additional classrooms on that side of the building. So we're netting out more than 4 classrooms. The physical addition has 4 brand-new classrooms, but because now we have a dedicated cafeteria, auditorium type of space that we're, you know, currently in the building, those spaces are, those will be then configured.
Has that already been
Thank you.
budgeted for?
Yeah, that was part of it. It was like phased, because of course we need, in order to move anything, we need
Yeah.
that to. So the idea just in terms of the library piece of it, or the yes, the learning, we call it, or kind of rebranding it, Learning Commons, right? Like the new library, that will then happen this summer, because then we'll have the cafeteria for children to eat. So
Right.
that is scheduled for the summer.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes, okay. So this is again, what are we doing further up on the left? Yeah, so again, this is just again showing, middle school auditorium, showing them up, this was actually, we were very happy to get past a lot of the work involved here, because they had a really tight working space, and getting all those units and new ductwork up into that space, you know, was pretty tricky. So that, this shows a picture of that being installed there. And then, again, this is, we're gonna do a much more official, opening. This is one side of the music suite, but again, unlike, like I said before, the pictures, when you go into the space, you'll really be able to appreciate it. It has this beautiful lighting, beautiful high ceilings, and once the storage is received in the district, which has been delayed, and that's been a little bit challenging, it will be, we'll have a grand opening in that space shortly. So, but we just put a little teaser in here for that.
Looks great. Very nice, Maureen.
It'll be great.
Cabinets that you're waiting on for the music suite?
Yeah, that has been, I mean, we've gotten all sorts of, you know, water heaters, big, you know, boilers for the building, but like the storage for the music suite has been, I guess furniture in general, any type of furniture and storage, even the contractors have said it, for whatever reason, that has been more difficult to get than some other things that, you know, you might
Wood
think
is
would have
expensive
been,
right
we're
now.
now about to get it, so.
Do-
Like
do-
air handlers, you know.
So globally.
We're lucky we haven't been impacted more by supply chain issues so far,
Right.
hopefully, right?
Right, oh, no, absolutely, that's why, I mean, although it's,
Yeah.
I feel barely like we had hoped, and our schedule, like in terms of the construction of the suite has been done, but this is kind of that last, piece to really make it you know.
Can we use it before the cabinetry comes, or?
You could, I mean, we were also, there was, you know, we wanted to get our COs, which is, get the official, and again, that's also been a little bit with the state, sometimes just the paperwork, it's just like takes a little bit, I don't wanna say delayed, but it just takes a touch more time on their end, you know, I think they're still a bit behind with COVID and things, so.
We actually locked in the pricing, because if you are trying to do any renovations right now, it's so expensive. Like, the prices are like, materials are not there.
So that's it now, just I'll provide just the rest of my, I just have a couple quick update items. Other than this, that I will share. Just as a reminder, we will be kicking off our official budget season with the Budget 101 session on Wednesday, January 26th at 7 p.m. Initially, I had actually said an earlier date, but just with some information with state aid and things, we decided to push it to later in January, but the blast, I believe, should be going out tomorrow. Again, the Budget 101 is an effort to boost participation and engage more residents in the budget discussions. During this session, some of what will be covered include details on how our budget is developed, including the constraints, mandates, contractual obligations, and other parameters that go into school financing. We will review historical trend data for Hastings, as well as look at what we project out for the coming years. An informed and active group of residents can make a difference, and we hope that the session provides an opportunity for many to become involved. A blast, as I mentioned, will be going out this week, and we hope people will be able to attend. Again, for those who are not, all of this we build into our the website so that as we're entering the budget sessions, and people will have this information to review. Then there were just a few other things I wanted to quickly mention. I don't know whether some parents may have received last week an email blast from our transportation department, similar to what we've been reading throughout the county. They were having some issues just staffing in the last few weeks with some bus drivers. I don't want to say it's only COVID, but I think that was part of some of the challenges they faced last week. You know, we're continuing to try to communicate as well as we can with parents, and for our district, we did ask them to, you know, prioritize our special education routes, you know, if there was a shortage of drivers. So I think, you know, they're definitely more on top of it, and, you know, we're working together just to ensure that, you know, if we have limited buses for a particular time, that we're, you know, really careful in the ones that, you know, we run and don't run. Also, the solar project, as Melissa was mentioning, that the enterprise did pick up that story also, so that was, again, that's moving forward, and the contracts that we approved last time were sent over, so that's in motion. This week also, Joe, myself, and our architects and engineers will be meeting with some residents that are part of the Climate Smart Communities group in Hastings. Mary Lambert had she had reached out to me a few weeks back and put us in touch with a gentleman, Ray Highland, who is leading up some efforts locally on stormwater management. It was really great timing for us as we're looking at some mitigations, you know, things that we may want to put in place at Hillside School in particular, now that that's being finally built. So we're meeting tomorrow on that. And a lot of it is actually just gardening and, you know, using stormwater to like irrigate your property. So we are looking, prior to us finalizing our outdoor hillside plans, we wanted to incorporate that into what we're doing.
Maureen, I don't know if you've done the budgeting 101 before, but I just want to commend you on the transparency and the willingness to communicate with the community. I think it's amazing, and what a wonderful thing, and I hope lots of people do take advantage of it. I will be.
She has done them.
She's done that
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
times, yeah.
Are we going to do that virtually, or how's that going to be done?
Well, I think right now the plan would be, it would be done more than likely, I guess, through, we would probably live stream it. I don't think we would do a Zoom. We would probably do a
Okay.
live stream. See, I think initially we were thinking of doing it either in like the auditorium, like a larger space, because typically we don't, I mean, although I think it's fascinating, we don't get a big crowd, so,
I was in your big crowd last year, Maureen, it wasn't very big.
No,
There were 4 of us.
I know before. And
Besides
there are
you and
people who
Valerie.
watch it, I guess, online.
Yeah,
because
I think
people
watching it,
mentioned
especially in this month with
Right.
the Omicron.
Right.
Good.
I mean, so
Yeah.
I think, Bill and I could talk a little bit further about that. We were going to just kind of announce it, and I actually had said to Jason tentatively, maybe we could do it in the, high school auditorium and live stream it, because, there was no conflict that evening, so. But if we're finding, I don't know, Bill, whatever you think, if we find the numbers are going, we would just do a Zoom or, or something, that's fine too.
Okay. TBD. Okay, thank you, Maureen. Okay, Gus and Sabine. Sabine and Gus.
Good evening. The 2 snow days last week were exactly what students needed during a high-stress period. But in a way, they kind of threw everyone off. Although always celebrated, snow days make it tougher to get back into the rhythm of school. Especially with MLK Day on Monday and then midterms week the week after, it's going to be a crazy month. Speaking of which, many people are not looking forward to the next few weeks as the anticipation around midterms builds. Many students have final tests and papers due before the upcoming exam period. In terms of COVID cases, it definitely feels as though students are dropping like flies. Every day I feel like I'm hearing about someone in the high school testing positive. Students I have talked to have a high level of anxiety and fear. Naturally, everyone's afraid of getting COVID. I've also noticed that recently more people are now opting into the surveillance testing program for extra precaution. As mentioned earlier, Hastings senior Josh Thigpen has been nominated for Low HUD's Boys Basketball Player of the Week. He has been an influential part of the boys basketball program for many years, including being named MVP when Hastings won the section title in early 2020. Right now, he is in very close competition for the top spot with one other nominee that has 32% of the votes, and Josh currently has 31% of the votes. Voting ends at 2 p.m. Tuesday, and the winner will be announced on Low HUD's social media accounts Tuesday night.
The boys basketball team also beat our rival Dobbs Ferry last week, and the girls have had an exceptional season so far. As for track, the 2022 league championships were yesterday, and girls team won the league, which was a big success for them. They swept it. Boys got 3rd place, but there were a ton of great performances. Senior Emmett McGrath took 1st place in the 2-mile. So did Caitlin Thomas for the girls. Celia Silverstein and Pat Maloney both took 1st in the 600 for boys and girls. Junior Noah Angoff got 1st in the 300, and both the boys and girls 4x4 teams got 1st place in the league. And senior Jake Suzuki got the school record in the weight throw. So it was a good night for
Wow.
the track team. And then back to Ollie. Dr. McCursey and Szymanski, you guys kind of covered it, but it's a really big deal. I'm in that class with him. He's been working his butt off to get all that stuff done. And it's an incredibly prestigious award. It's one of the biggest ones that you can win in science research. He's getting $2,000 for himself and for the school, which is awesome. And his project is brilliant. Asthma and trips to the emergency room for asthma based on redlining maps from the 20s, I think. Really interesting project. He worked with a professor at WashU and just worked all summer. Really, really impressive. So we're all rooting for him to go super far in the competition, and it's already a huge success for the school.
That's a great story. A lot of good news today. That's always good.
We should just end the meeting.
Good. We're out. Thanks, guys. Okay, public comment. Okay. All right, on to the curriculum review cycle development presentation. pass it back over to Melissa Szymanski.
We have some slides up, and wanted to begin with what a curriculum review cycle is. And so that's really a process for examining curriculum, strategically prioritizing key curricular areas, and ensuring a phased approach over a given duration of time. So it's meant to be flexible. So what we're doing is designing a structure, but it's not meant to be carved in stone, because we always have to, as districts and learning institutions, remain flexible to what's going on within the system and what we're learning through our improvement efforts. So this curriculum review cycle is in response to needs, and it's also going to provide a structure, and that will guide our improvement efforts. So I want to say thank you to our ongoing design group, which is taking the form of our professional learning committee. This group has been annually designing our professional development plan that goes to the state. This group also plans for our superintendent conference days, and it's not an accident that this group is also creating the curriculum review cycle, because each of those pieces really fit together. I'd like to feature our committee members, and this is membership that reflects all of the bargaining units across Hastings. So we have everything from CSEA clerical to administrative unit, teachers. So we really have a diverse group that participates in this process, because the philosophy is that every single member of our faculty is a member of our learning community and engaged in ongoing learning. So the key areas of focus with the Professional Learning Committee thus far, as related to the curriculum review cycle, have included considering approaches and parameters for curriculum review cycles, investigating current development and implementations efforts that are already underway and have been over the past few years, and then some initial curriculum review cycle design efforts to try to get some ideas to paper. So when we consider the purpose and philosophy of a curriculum review cycle, it's important that we are fostering student-centered aspirational education. We're embracing commitment to continual improvement in curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So I just want to highlight here that this is not ever meant to be a deficit model. This recognizes that wonderful things are happening, and how do we then build on those strengths so that we're always growing and we're always improving. And then finally, ensuring a curriculum review cycle that is collaborative. And that's both in the design process and also when engaged in the various phases of the cycle. So together, as a professional learning committee, we considered the core principles of improvement science. And these are principles that have helped us to prioritize areas of focus and are going to continue to help us as we engage in our efforts within areas of focus over the course of a specific of the cycle. And so I included a link in the presentation. The rabbit hole goes very deep in improvement science, and I'm actually very passionate about this. It is very research-based, and I'd like to just take a moment, though, to highlight some of the principles, because it's just really important that we're saying that this is underscoring our philosophy around improvement. So the first is making curricular work problem-specific and user-centered. We can very easily substitute opportunity-specific for the word problem-specific, but it's really this idea of what are we trying to solve, or in what ways do we have opportunities to grow? And so that's the first principle. The second is that variation in performance is the core problem to address. You've heard me talk about, when I did the presentations about the diagnostic screeners, right, that what we really want to always be doing is attending to variation where we see something that's different, so that we can start asking questions about that. And sometimes that difference can be something that can create improvement, meaning let's focus here because we see an opportunity. We see something that, either performance is very different for a group, or in a content area we're seeing some variation somehow, Or we can actually look on the other end too to say, wow, we're really off the charts here. What's working in this area that we can actually replicate some of that in other areas?
Melissa, can I interrupt you quick?
Sure.
It might be, you can click on that. Is it worth just,
Don't know
Yeah,
if
it's
we
working.
it
can.
does work. I don't know if you can't.
You have to do it all.
Let me go up.
From here.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if it's done as a PDF or if it.
It works,
there
it works, it
Perfect.
goes on the
Perfect.
website.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Doug.
There, I'll
Um,
keep the.
Perfect. So the third one is seeing the system that produces the current outcomes. So this idea that we have to fully understand something is really critical. And when you look at something that you see that variation, it's very, very easy to go to, oh, it's because of X or it's because of Y. And typically, it's usually a series of contributing factors, and you want to be able to see the entire system and then be thinking about where the biggest bang for the buck is in terms of improvement. The fourth is we cannot improve at scale what we cannot measure. So we want to make sure that we have outcomes, and those outcomes are really clear. And so, you know, there's this idea, one of my favorite gurus in professional learning is this idea that is Dr. Giselle Martin-Kniep, and she always says we have to measure we have to make sure we can measure what matters. If it matters to us, we find a way to measure it, and it doesn't necessarily mean a number, but we have to find a way to say these are our outcomes, and this is how we're going to learn more about whether or not we've made a difference. The fifth is anchoring practice improvement in disciplined inquiry. And really, there's something called a PDSA cycle, and that's this notion of plan, do, study, act. And it's a cycle where we learn fast, we fail fast, we improve quickly. And so it's you know, the word iterative is often used, and if you think of that, it's like this spiraling process that you're always building on something you've learned quickly, and you're growing from there, and you're blossoming it. And then the sixth is really around accelerating improvements through network communities. And very simply, we're better together. You know, we accomplish more with more minds, and the more that we can have a networked community, whether that means across different people, across buildings, or from district to district, that we can accelerate our improvement process. So these areas of improvement science were really quite critical to be able to kind of ground us as we were getting started. And then the development of the actual review cycle, we took this notion of the PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, and this became our anchor for looking at what the review cycle is going to entail. So that there needs to be some planning involved, there needs to be, and that planning phase is really an inquiry. So you can take any content area, mathematics, science, ELA, and you start by doing some analysis. You're taking a look at those variations. You're saying, wow, this is really interesting. Let me look at this further. Student data, faculty resources, all sorts of things that contribute to real full understanding of the area. And then from there, we turn to the research and we say, okay, what does the research say about this when we're thinking about our improvement efforts? And then the next piece of that is actually the design. So in making the plan, what are we going to design that's going to go into our improvement efforts? The second phase is the do phase, and we talked for us in Hastings about that would be about implementing the change. So that would be the implementation part of the cycle. The third is this idea of study, and that's what we're going to do after we've implemented and tried something. And it's really what's the evidence of learning and what's the evidence of impact. And you're thinking about, you know, what's actually happened related to the change effort, what did we measure, and what did we learn about how we did. And then finally is the act phase, and that's where there's an evaluation and reflection on the success of the plan, right? So how did the implementation itself go? How did the system respond to actually implementing the plan? And then also when we're evaluating our change efforts, what came through with student learning and student performance. So it's both of those pieces, right? So then the next thing we did is we took this kind of philosophy of improvement science, that's the foundation of all of it. We took the idea of this PDSA cycle, thinking this is going to be our process of the actual cycle itself. We then started looking at some regional samples. And there were 4 in particular that really stood out, and they were all very, very different. And we liked them for different reasons. So we started digging into those samples that were available to us from Bedford, Byram Hills, Chappaqua, and Rye City. And all 4 of them were incredibly strong, and again, all 4 incredibly different. But the same sort of philosophy around this PDSA cycle type approach.
Did they make these public?
They did not. Some of them have them posted on their website. I actually tapped my, my network, and I actually got a whole bunch of them and started pulling through. And those 4 really stood out to me for different reasons. But yes, on their website, some have them up, but any that do not, I'm sure that I can get some permission to share.
So is that about looking at their curriculum specifically, or their process to review their curriculum?
Their process, the actual curriculum review cycles that they have in their district.
Got
So
it.
what are the, and actually this is a perfect segue. So, you know, when we thought as a group around our parameters for creating this, we started thinking, well, what are our actual phases going to be? What's our timeline? What's the content? And then are there other observations when we're looking at these approaches that the different districts have taken? And so what the first thing, you know, we engaged in lots of discussion. It was really robust and interesting, you know, just many different ideas about just the design of the review cycle. What we came to consensus on is here on this slide. So that we felt that the length of a cycle should be about 3 to 5 years. And that really depends on many factors. So if something, for example, would need a big overhaul, like a complete, like we get new standards and we need a complete overhaul, that would take a greater amount of time than something where we're saying, okay, let's take a look. Can we put in a new resource, for example? That would take a shorter period of time. So we wanted to make sure that there was a range, and we established that the length of the cycle is about 3 to 5 years. And remember, we're working with the 4 phases, right? So thinking about what's happening over the course of time within those 3 to 5 years. So we did name and define our phases. And again, this is all a work in progress right now, but here's where we are at the moment. Phase 1 is our plan phase, which incorporates analysis and research. So that's that data dive portion of it, and turning to the peer-reviewed research. Phase 2 is our design and development phase. Phase 3 is actually implementing the change effort. And then phase 4 is evaluation. So looking back, thinking, where do we go next? The other thing is that the group had a lot of input on the prioritization of our content areas. And this is still in flux right now, but here's where we've come to. And this is based on both our student performance data and our knowledge of what's been going on within the system, not only in terms of improvement efforts, but also needs from different departments. And what we said is we're going to be focusing on a cycle that incorporates mathematics, science, ELA, social studies, world languages, fine and performing arts, PE health. And what we're saying too is that ENL, English as a new language, special education, culturally responsive pedagogies, and the computer science, digital literacy, and social emotional learning will be incorporated into all of the content areas. They're not going to sit alone. There won't be 1 year that we're just doing, for example, an implementation around X, that it is embedded in the things that are happening. We also began thinking about formatting. We decided that we wanted something very clean. We wanted it to be public, transparent, visible, and very easy to decipher. So we're hoping to model after the actual formatting that Bedford uses, which is one page. Sparse text, we liked the idea of color. We didn't like tabs, which sounds funny, but there was one that we looked at that one of the districts lovingly refers to as the monster, and it had about 50 different tabs. And we're thinking if we want to create something that is really actionable and definitely visible and understandable, we want to keep it very tight. And then finally, we started playing with some initial design efforts. So the conversations that we had around the curriculum review cycle were also very much connected to some key initiatives that we've had underway within the past few years. So in the absence of a curriculum review cycle, you may have heard me say in the very beginning of the year when we started talking about curriculum review cycles, I created one without actually putting it to paper, meaning that there was a great deal of data that pointed to urgency, particularly in the area of mathematics and interest. And, you know, it was primed to make sure that this was a key area of focus. So we started there. The following year, you know, we had another great motivator, which is that we had new standards in science, right? The 3D standard, the New York P12 science learning standards. So we started with like the plan phase in mathematics. Then we moved into that next phase, right? We're now in an implementation phase in mathematics where we've taken on big ideas. Meanwhile, not far behind, nipping at its heels, we've been looking at science and we've been thinking about the new standards and we've been redesigning lessons. So we're in the design and development phase in science right now and about to move into implementation there. So that's just to give you a little idea of like what that could look like. So there's work that's happening in multiple content areas, but there are different places around that PDSA cycle approach. Similarly with ELA, you know, one of the really robust conversations we've been having about ELA is pretty massive. So where mathematics is, mathematics is mathematics. ELA encompasses word study. It encompasses writing. It encompasses reading. It encompasses a variety of different things. And so, you know, ELA at Hillside, for example, is taking a much longer amount of time than it did to get an implementation going just in mathematics in the middle school, for example, because ELA is so nuanced in the different areas that are part of it. So we had lots of really good conversations around this. So even within any one phase of a review cycle, there are also phases within it. So that when you're implementing, you're still also learning and you're still also using that information to reflect and inform and go back. And so it's almost like mini cycles within a portion of the cycle, if that makes sense. So anyway, these areas that we're actually living right now, the input of the group really helped us to think about how we wanted to structure our curriculum review cycle. So where are we now? So we have some upcoming areas of focus. So we've really got to commit that concept to paper. We've started playing. We thought about what could it look like, particularly because we have 3 different buildings and that have prioritized different content areas. So there needs to be some thought given to what's on the plate for each building, particularly when you're thinking about a kindergarten teacher who teaches all of the content areas versus a department in a middle school or a high school who may, you know, teachers may teach one content area, and what does that look like? So we're giving a lot of thought to that in our review process. Broader faculty input. So all of this was shared with the department chairs and some preliminary input, and actually more input happened today at our chair council meeting. So that was really helpful. So thinking about, you know, is 5 years too long? Is 5 years too short? You know, so thinking about, you know, there's been some alignment work prior to my arrival, right? Or there's upcoming alignment work, but maybe it's smaller. So for example, we're really, really interested in moving forward the civics seal in social studies. So will that constitute a curriculum review effort, or is that more of a mini effort? So those are the types of conversations that we're having within the departments and with the department chairperson. And I'd like to have broader faculty input just beyond chair council as well. And then finally, we need to consider implications for professional learning. One of the beautiful things about having a curriculum review cycle is that it also helps from a budgetary perspective, because you can't prioritize everything all at once. And also when there's interest in moving forward with something in a content area, you also can't do that well across many different content areas at the same time. There really has to be a priority. And then thinking about professional learning that's related to that really matters. And what does that look like, and how do we keep that rollout really strong? So there's a lot going on with the curriculum review cycle. This is where we are at the moment, and thankfully we're at a place now where we're playing on paper, and we're getting close. So that is where we are, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
I was taking some notes down, but I first want to say thank you. This is really, really amazing. I'm so excited about this. And thank you for just taking the bull by the horns to drive this, because this is so important. I'm very happy inside of me right now, because this is progress. And I want to thank you for doing this. And this is one of the best news for me right now. So I want to add to, thank you, and add to some of the things that I'm hoping is, if you could, starting it is so important that I'm hoping that I know those failures, like you showed those 6 steps. Sometimes those failures is misconstrued as things not working. And so the way that it gets started is extremely important. So this is what I wanted to be succinct. So I was taking notes and trying to put my thoughts together. But the observational stage to conduct the research that provides the questions of inquiry is the most critical thing to identify. I know you know this. And I am hoping that people will be patient with you when it comes to that, because they may think you are just going in circles, but that is so important, and it's very necessary, because it creates the collective focus that you need. Without that being staged, and which I'm hoping people, everyone, parents, teachers, everybody will be patient with you on that first part. I like the fact that you have all the cycles, even with the 5 years or 3 years or whatever, but because that is so important to create that collective focus that would allow for a laser focused attention for a collective direction. That collective direction is necessary. And when that gets established, there may be diverse pathways that all the experts, the teachers may bring to obtain this actionable goal that we are all trying to achieve and get for our students. But then spending that time in the rigor and clearly mapping out these observational stages. And I would ask that when that process, when we are doing these observational stages, when your group, your team is doing, they would look from the lens of all of our students. Start from the lens of all of our students in their holistic states, connected to the teacher's skills and the resources available to them, and how we can harness it. Because when we start from that pipeline, then the approach that would drive the research or the questions or problem, I like to use the word inquiry, to address, become. Now, I will say that I know that this includes our vulnerable students, but if you think of the litmus test for any district or any institution, whether it's school or college, is how well the vulnerable population is served, because they don't have the leisure of paying for tutoring to serve their kids, right? Because everything is individualized. And so that we don't have that broken toy concept with them, so to speak. But thank you. That's what I would just say for doing this. This is really great, and thank you for it.
And, you said it better, much better than I did, but like the two principles you just highlighted of improvement science, this idea of in improvement science, they call it user-centered. For us, that is the children, right? Like what, from the student perspective, that's really important to sit in the shoes of a student. And sometimes that just, always it involves asking the students. The students are close to the work, and you want to make sure you're asking them what their experience is so that you can really understand it. And then the second is that variation piece. So who are our more vulnerable learners and why and what's happening there? So, yeah, thank you.
Question, can we look at slide 7 again?
Yep.
Thank you. So with the phases, phase 1, 2, 3, who's involved in those phases?
So that, it depends. It would depend on what the content area is, but when I'm thinking about, I'll draw from, science, for example, some of the work that was recently underway there. So when we're thinking about our planning phase in science, that has involved a number of people. So it's involved Melissa Shandroff, it's involved the principals, it's involved Robin Farrell. It's actually, so there are a couple things, right? So that initial planning included those key stakeholders, but then when we moved into, and I would still consider design development, still kind of an overlap with plan, the teachers, on the grade level were also involved in that. And so they were thinking, well, let me see, I've been doing some research around the new standards. I've been learning about what's happening in the world around the new standards. I see how this district is approaching them. And then they got involved in saying, okay, I'm going to now create, with them, a heat map. I had them do heat maps together around where are our current units of study, to what extent are we aligned to the new standards, how do we know, like what's our evidence for that? So they then got involved in sort of that planning process, and then that information, that planning piece, went with that group that I was just referring to, the administrators and Robin and Melissa Shandroff and myself, back to, at the time, Helen Pashley, our expert who was liaising with the state around, okay, so here's what we've come up with, here's what's going to be helpful to us. Here's our plan of how we need some additional help in some areas that we need some learning. And then we move back into that design phase. So it's a great question, and it depends on the nature of the work that's happening, but as many people as possible, and again, keeping it user-centered. So who's going to be doing the implementation? Those are the people who should be involved in the design process. Who's going to be on the receiving end of the implementation? The students. So we have to make sure that we understand how they're experiencing their learning.
The reason I ask is for the professional learning committee, which seems to be at the capstone to this, it's not really have any academics on it. So when I saw it, so what is the reason, why does it exist in that manner?
It's a great question, yeah. And that group, and it is a diverse group across the stakeholders, also goes back to their colleagues for additional input on things. But your question around the actual curricular work in a content area sits with the content specialists and those who are engaged in the implementation. Yeah.
I just give you a concrete example. Like even in science, one of the, sort of, for me, more exciting things that came up over the past 2 years, credit to you guys, is, was the Project Lead the Way stuff. And to Toby Linder, I have to thank her as well. I remember her mentioning it to me, even not without that name, like 6 years ago. And that was a case where, to me, one of the more fascinating things that's come up was driven by one person with an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out to be a good one, and my son's in the class, he loves it.
Mm-hmm.
So my thought, issue, concern is that if the process that we have here, how does something like that come up? You know, if the capstone to the curriculum review is a non-academic committee, how would something, if it wasn't a parent who brought it in, how would something like Project Lead the Way, or how would the next thing like that, how's that going to survive the process? That's my concern.
Yeah, so I mean, in the case of Project Lead the Way, there was, you know, and again, kudos to Toby Linder for sure, and a lot of support from both Valerie and myself. Like, both of us have been Project Lead
Yes,
the Way
absolutely.
districts before, and so being able to, the first thing that happened was a conversation with Melissa Shandroff, right, to say, here's this opportunity that we have. What do you think about this? Let's learn a little bit more about it. You know, do we need to go see it in different places? Do you think there might be anyone who's interested in that? So it doesn't, I think, I love the question so much, because what I don't want to suggest is that we create a curriculum review cycle and it's this stone wall of like, we said we were doing math in year X and Y and Z, and that's what we're doing, you know, and it's meant to be that structure there so we can prioritize and move things forward, but it's also not meant to keep things out that are great innovative ideas. We can put them in there. The other thing that we were talking about at Chair Council today is that just because it's not, you know, the year for fine and performing arts, right? There may be some work that still needs to happen. So it doesn't mean that nothing happens in a content area. It means that, like, that's not the priority area of focus right now from a district-wide perspective. But so these other things that you're talking about, opportunities, ideas, innovations, you know, that it doesn't shut the door to that. You know, and I think with Project Lead the Way, that's also a great example, because that is an important course and an important opportunity for us. It's also not systemic, like we're only doing Project Lead the Way. So we needed to make sure that we were training people who were interested. We had some innovators that were involved, and it definitely sat alongside our improvement efforts. So we were thinking about what are the outcomes we're hoping for? How do we make sure our science curriculum is not only aligned, but also innovative? It all fit together really well. So we want to make sure that we keep that open stance so that we do allow for these innovations to happen.
Yeah, I know that Doug had mentioned it. If it would be possible to see what a completed curriculum review, you mentioned Byram Hills or Bedford, what that would look like, I would certainly like to see what it would, just to get a sense of what we're actually talking about.
Sure.
And I'll just point something out that we should be cognizant of, which a lot of educators are talking about right now. I don't know whether Jeremy is happening at your place, but I know that sometimes, I mean, education is a social affair, whether we want to accept it or not. It is. It's individuals, just experts are individuals just like us, who are coming with these conceptual ecologies that they share with, and which are, so sometimes we think that our kids are like some SpongeBobs that we have to soak up with this kind of, you know. And so when I personally, and it may not answer some of your questions, but I know you and I have talked on different levels, so I'm just throwing this out there. But sometimes every student, it's not just special ed students that require individualized educational experience. And such projects allows for, we have the traditional way of teaching kids that we are calling traditional because that has been what was passed down to us. But in recent times, this whole understanding that the approach is that kind of rich pedagogy that we learn from each other, from globally, from our colleagues, from engaging, from other parents, like how I did not read a manual to learn how to parent. I just did it and asking along the way. So it creates that opportunity to strengthen instruction, teaching, pedagogy, at the same time allowing that healthy balance that allows the representation that is owed to every child. Because sometimes other people, that traditional way of learning suits them, which is the status quo right now. But without things like this, where it looks like non-academic people are part of it, the fact that they may not be traditional non-academic, or they've not gone through that so-called educational system, they have more ideas that are outside. a brilliant ecologist talked about how if the candle makers of light, we did not allow that outside of that candle, like we'll never have light bulbs, because that idea never came from the candle makers. It came from the fringes. So you may assume that they are not expert in that area, but the body of knowledge that they will bring is because they are not all focused on one thing. They are focused on other alternative lenses that adds to the richness of what we are all socially trying to do. Rich education is a social
No,
endeavor.
I-
So I'm just throwing it in
No,
there.
I think it's valid, you know, just from my sort of local viewpoint, you know, I feel like there's a lot of interesting things that come from the teachers themselves. And particularly, you know, obviously we talk about assessment, we have academic assessments, but we also have the SEL assessment, and that's a divergent kind of topic. You know, they're the ones in touch with the students and how these things hit the students and what the sort of, you know, it's like a comedian on stage. Does it work? Does it not work? And so, you know, I feel like obviously we define success holistically. It's not just academic. And the teachers have a lot, they're in touch with a lot of that holism, if that's a word. So I just, you know.
Well, if I understand, because I've lived this elsewhere in other districts where they've had it, and it's actually healthy they're not featured here. But I think the multiple years matters, and I think curriculum also, I think, let's use Project Lead the Way. You want your curriculum designed and structured such that there's lots of room for Project Lead the Ways. And you don't want it left to an individual teacher. Because then you just get things all over the place that sometimes work and sometimes don't, and probably doesn't add up to a whole lot. So a good curriculum review cycle is, one, what is a good curriculum? I mean, that's your overarching intellectual framework for how you're going to proceed over time in a field of study, but also then it also gives you a shot at going multidisciplinary if it's thought through well. But in a good curriculum review cycle, teachers are at the heart of it. So the professional learning committee, that's a teacher committee. Teachers at the heart of it, and you want to provide a way so that they're helping over a multi-year period to guide that. Where it's also worked well is you break that fourth wall. If the fourth wall here is just we're stuck in our Hastings place, well, no, we're going to be bringing in other thoughtful people to help us. Some of that may be through standards, because standards are actually well designed or a good touchstone, be it in the sciences or whatever. So, but I think that's why the multi-year part matters. I think the phasing that Melissa's laid out here matters. And I think helping the board see examples elsewhere where it's worked, either from these four or some others.
Yeah.
But again, coming back to the project, that's a very powerful example because you want to have systems that allow that to happen. And a good curriculum review cycle will let that occur. And if the board is willing to embrace that multi-year part of this, that's really important because it ain't a sprint. This is a marathon to get it right. So I don't know if that little monologue helps or not.
I wasn't suggesting that the teacher should be able to do what they want.
Oh, I know.
I said, right, that the ideas would be able to bubble up. You know, things I'm very happy with so much that happens in the district, but I'm always nervous that the things that happen, do they happen systemically or just sort of serendipitously? So I'm always trying to see what can we do to ensure that we have, the most beneficial outcomes. And this is a particularly important one, so, but I think just seeing what some other districts have done would certainly for me be
Well,
very
and I think
interesting.
Melissa had a key phrase. You don't want this to be the wall or you can't get anything else. You want it to be fostering innovation.
Yes.
But it still has a coherent sense to it.
Right.
If that makes.
And full disclosure, because the plate often overfloweth across districts, as you know. Some of my colleagues, when I originally asked for their curriculum review cycles, just to be able to take a look at, one of them jokingly said, "Oh, it's time, we've got to dust that off. Thank you. Thanks for getting that back on my radar." Because sometimes what happens is that you're living within an initiative, albeit very successful, and then you're thinking about your district goals and your strategic planning, right? Like, it's all got to fit together. And sometimes what happens is you do need to revise these things. So I'm really careful to say, I believe very deeply in this. I think it provides structure, flexibility. It gives us some prioritization for ongoing improvement. And also, I want to be really careful that we don't carve it in stone, because when we're doing these other great things or things are coming up, to your point, it's got to fit together. So it means maybe we look at it again, or maybe, you know, that it's a living document. It's meant to be living and breathing and responsive, so.
I totally appreciate what Dr. McCarthy is saying and what you're saying, that it's a marathon and not a sprint. I would just wonder, and I don't want to micromanage this at all. I mean, you guys are the experts. I don't really want, you know, I don't expect to get in the weeds. But it might be helpful, and maybe this was part of your plan, to just communicate, I don't know, once a year or whatever, to the community where you're at with certain things. Because when you ask a community to commit to 3 to 5 years, you know, you're thinking like, gosh, my kid's already gonna be out of like high school or out of middle school, and you know, you're doing this. Can you do it a little faster for me, you know, so I can benefit from it? So I think that as long as people know like what's happening, I'm not saying we need to know the details, but just I think it would be helpful for the community to know if you're gonna spend 3 to 5 years on something, where you're at certain places with certain subjects, I think could be helpful.
Okay, thank you. This has been obviously an opening conversation in a much larger process. Thank you for leading the way.
Our group, they're doing great work.
Yeah, they're super dedicated, really
Yeah, they're
appreciate
doing
that.
great work. And the people involved, even in the current curricular work, I'm really proud of them. I know, especially during a pandemic, it's a really heavy lift. When we're thinking about, you know, regionally, can we cover classes, can we open, right? That this is all still happening, makes me really proud of everyone that we're doing the very best we can with our eye on the prize. And I hope that this is continuing to be invigorating, right? So that, you know, we think about these things, we set goals for our own learning, and we see value in this, which is really important.
Okay. I'm also sensitive to Sabine and Gus hanging out here. We're gonna move into like business items now, and like I don't want to chase you out of here in case you're dying to be a part of that. So it's really up to you. I don't, you know, I'm also sensitive. You got a lot going on right now. So and it's almost 9:30. Got a good couple hours in. So up to you. Whatever you want to do.
I don't mind.
Good night.
These midterms coming up, it's getting a little busy.
Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Good night, thank you.
Take care.
Okay, so now moving into some business items. Let me go back to, I'm on the Carnegie Foundation here. Okay, does anybody 7A have any questions or comments on some of the business items?
I just have one question about item number 4, the mural proposal. I don't know who to direct that to. I don't know who's managing that.
I can take it. Janice
Okay.
has been coordinating it.
I'm just wondering if we like get to see the design before it's painted.
Yes. The small we have seen the design, so yes, there's been a mock-up of that.
Okay.
And I can figure out how to share that. So that
I'm
you
just
can
curious. It's always helpful to have a few other eyes on it just before it gets painted
Yeah.
and people are like, why did you put you?
Where's that one going?
I'm sure it'll be fine.
The middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah, where in the middle
I'm
school?
not sure, it is definitely the middle school, I'm not sure which hallway, I can't remember.
Same thing with the community, with the school community painting it, or no?
Yes, we're painting it.
The hallway right down.
Right here. Thank
right
you.
here.
Oh, right outside?
Thank
Oh,
you.
so
Oh,
it's-
yeah, that's that big, the big space outside the
So is
nurse's
Joe
office.
Pimentel designing it or the students are designing it?
It's both, and
both.
so they're working
Got it.
together,
Oh,
to
that's
kind of go
cool.
back and forth
Oh,
on it.
that's great.
Did
Oh,
you
it's
see
a
the one last-
student
Did
Did you see
initiative.
the one last year or no?
It's a student
He
initiative.
Is he
Yeah.
the same guy?
It's the same person.
Yes,
It's
same
the same
person.
person.
Oh, it's the same,
So it's
okay.
very student-centered. That's what I like about
Perfect.
it.
That's great.
So,
He's-
Okay, yeah, I don't need
He's
to,
good.
I don't
Yeah.
need to see, I just want to make sure that
He makes it
somebody
happen.
was saying, great,
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The high schoolers did it.
It's actually
yeah.
beautiful. I've seen it. I'll figure out how I
I
can. show you.
painted like 1/16 of one
I think I
sunray.
saw,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
I saw a
Very
picture
hard
of
to
it
stand
on the
on.
line.
That's not easy.
So funny. It was really color by number, so it was like idiot proof.
Yeah.
So
What
that we
color
could
did
use-
you choose though? You can
That was not
remember?
even a
Yeah, he
choice.
was
they
a sign.
We were
Sign.
told.
I was given yellow.
You were giving
Yeah.
yellow?
I did blue.
Me too.
Yeah.
And we could even make mistakes, and he would follow behind us and
Yeah,
clean them
but
up.
don't worry.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I totally,
He
I
was-
mean, it
he
was
was
very
very good.
heartwarming to see the pictures of the boards doing it. I loved it.
He actually he himself has a great story. He was doing something else. Someone asked him to do a mural. He did it. And then like years later, he realized he could actually make a whole career of this. He's like raising his 2 little kids, just painting murals in schools. He was a really great, really nice guy.
Doreen, I'll share how the students engage with him, for the students to bring
Yeah,
their
that's
own
it, yeah.
ideas into it. It's pretty beautiful. It was on News 12 or something?
It was on News 12, the district sent out a whole thing
Something,
about it.
yeah.
There was like a
Yeah.
whole like,
I missed
The
it.
ribbon cutting. and-
Correct,
right,
correct.
because it happened like in June. So then it
Yeah,
was like a
right.
whole thing, you know. There's a lot happening in June.
I just, one comment, wanted to thank Hastings Alumni Association for donating parts and labor to building the trophy case outside the
Great.
Concord Gym. It's Jeremy's group, the Alumni Association.
Jeremy's actually building
I've seen his bunk bed work.
Can I
Solid.
also claim credit for Ollie Marpet's athletic ability too, while we're there?
You're his tackling buddy.
Virtual,
Inspiration.
more than dummy, right?
He's gonna go to dummy, and then I turned left. Okay, so thanks for that. Before we vote, any final thoughts or comments? Do I have a motion to approve items 1 through 8 under 7A business items?
Second.
All in favor?
I just want to say also, I think that the theme for the high school about the environmental justice seems really cool. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's coming along really nicely. The planning is really strong.
Do I have a motion to approve 7B placements and/or services for CSE and CPSE? A second?
Second.
All in favor? Under personnel, 8A through D, any questions or comments?
I would just comment, it's nice to see Joe Lopez taking on a second role in the school, professionally and personally. He is an excellent choice for work in our music lab, so I'm excited on that one.
He's actually going to be working throughout the building in the tech team.
Excellent on that too. Thank you. Yeah.
So I have a question. So under the resignation, I saw his name. Is it the same person?
He's just
Because
changing.
Changing,
roles, so he
okay.
resigned
So-
from-
Yeah, he's just.
Okay, got it, exactly. That's what I thought. I'm like, huh, you hired and resigned, like, yeah. Okay, got it.
Do I have a motion to approve personnel items under 8A through D?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Okay. 9A, approval of minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments, changes to the minutes? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve minutes from, what was the date there, 12/20? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Policy second read. I just had a quick question about this. Didn't we used to leave redlined versions of these in, or is that something that?
What was the second one? So the red lines were there.
They were? I think it's probably still worth, just for the second read, to leave the red lines in for both reads, just in case some of the community missed it, or, these are pretty short ones, so it's a little bit easier, but probably going forward, I think that would be helpful. Does anybody have any questions on the second read before we vote on them? On policy 1130 or 4315? A motion to approve. Policy, changes to policy 1130 and policy 4315. Second? All in favor? Okay, new business, casting a vote for the New York School Board Association Area 10 Director election. So I sent a note around letting everyone know this would be on here. Just a quick update for anyone in the public that might be listening. New York State School Board Association has about 18 board members. There's 5 people, I think, on their administrative team, and then 11 delegates essentially from different regions. Our region is Region 10, which is Putnam, Westchester, and Rockland. And so there are 3 people who are up for that seat because the current person has been elected president of NYSBA. So any thoughts or comments on people in the process?
I'm trying to understand, we're voting as a board for what?
Yeah, so we have to,
Select.
we have to, it's kind of a weird thing, I don't know how you do, because it's not really a vote that we just have to, we have to put forth, so we can kind of take a straw indication, and then as long as we have a quorum in that, you know, we'll vote officially, and then.
Let me start the straw then. I thought Frank's was a strong reason to vote for the Ardsley School Board guy.
I would second that. You know, I read the letter that Nicole Minori wrote in support of him. I found it very persuasive, especially, you know, that it's someone coming who has a long history in a small district, a lot like ours. It would be a good representative for our interests, so I'm happy to support Frank Harriton.
Going along with what Alex said, I did like the other 2 candidates. Actually, I thought all 3 of them seemed like they'd be good for one reason or another. All things being equal, and this might not be the right direction, but I agree that I was like, well, Ardsley is so similar to us that he might understand like things that we need versus the others, but that was my feeling of, I think the other 2 women seem strong for different reasons.
I kind of like Cheryl Brady, but.
Yeah, she was my top of the other 2. But White Plains is a big city and it's not the same as us, so.
She also sounded extremely busy. That was my concern.
That's what I said to Doug. I was like, I got tired just reading her volunteer activity list. I was like, wow, you're very engaged.
Decide no for her, and it made me more in favor of it.
She has a lot of education background, but
but she's on so many volunteer positions and the rest of it. I thought he seemed like a steady focus. He had 1 or 2 other things.
And literally, like Ardsley is a peer district. It's like the same student population size. He obviously is familiar even with the folks in this district, and we have esteemed members of our internal cabinet here who have a history there. So I think that we're well situated to be represented by somebody who has a keen understanding of what the Quad Village situation is like.
Agreed.
Okay.
So.
Sounds like we all, I don't know how Doug feels, but we all.
Yeah, no, Frank, I mean, I've met Frank, I've had lunch and coffee with Frank, and the one thing that really impressed me about Frank is that he's very kind of policy focused, go to Albany and advocate, although this isn't really like a region, but we go to Albany and really advocate for us. I know one of the things he's often thought was that, you know, Westchester often just kind of gets lumped into, oh, you're a wealthy district, it's okay if we pull your money, and that has always frustrated him. It's something he wants to fight for, to not just kind of put everyone in Westchester in the same bucket. So great. So I don't know if we officially have to vote, but just in case we do for some reason, let's just do it, right? So by a show of hands, all in favor of Frank Harriton for Area 10 Director? Okay, looks like we've got 7 votes, all right.
Frank, so now what's the next step?
So the next step is that Melissa has to file the ballot, right? Right, Melissa? You've got that, right?
And we find out.
I clicked on it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. was a,
Probably goes no.
I've read
Hey,
it.
I think that's an internal thing to us. Like,
Back to,
it's an internal thing
back
that
to,
goes to
back to Bill's note, this is Chicago voting style.
He's in the lead.
He just got elected mayor of Chicago.
Keep clicking.
Or Jeremy just voted for all of us.
Exactly.
No matter what we were gonna order, vote for.
exactly.
Well, unless we put, I guess the only thing you can do is, if you all put Hastings, then they're just gonna count it once, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
She's got it.
No, we don't have it.
Yeah.
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 Oh, the individual voting?
Yeah.
Oh, it's supposed to be like that?
Okay, second public comment, we don't have anyone here right now. Board of Ed comments. Okay.
I'm just going to say very quickly, add my thank you to Dr. Smansky for giving us that review. This is,
Oh, is that right?
congrats on that. And for the presentation, this is something we've really been hoping for a long time, and I know some of it's been in process, as you said, maybe not as concretely, but it's such a big step for our district. And just the community that's being created around learning a little more formally, so thank you for that.
Yeah, and I know it's a lot of work, and I think we're all supportive of it, so I hope, it's easy for you and the team to carve out time to dedicate to this, because I think we all feel very strongly it's super important.
Yeah, we're moving forward, and I'm also really flexible. I know that this is a hard time for people in general and families, and I'm keeping everybody involved. So if somebody can't physically be at a meeting, I make sure I engage their input or that they've seen it, and there's a slide deck, and there's dialoguing in a variety of different ways. So being flexible and making sure everyone's in the loop and contributing.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I would just like to thank the whole district, really. It's as crazy as things are sort of on the outside, the fact that it's so normal to our eyes is a real testament to how much work is going on. I feel like it's like a play where you go and you watch the play and everything works, and there's all these layers of things that happen that you don't see, and that's clearly going on here. And I think that I extend my own personal gratitude to everyone who's pulling that weight, because it's got to be significant.
You're here.
Wanted to just point out what Bill started talking about. I was very glad to hear you talking about from the principals and the nurses, and anything like that your efforts can lead to in your committees would be exceptional, so they can get back to working on the other aspects of the educational job. And whether we needed to do it with more testing or not, because I'm not a huge fan of the testing, but definitely the contact tracing, if you guys are persuasive, I think that'll be very helpful for our district. So best of luck with that push. Nice to hear about it.
And going back to your point about the tests that expire in January, it's like you said, it's impossible to get a test. So if you guys aren't going to use them, but thank you so much for considering how you can get these out to the community, because it's extraordinarily frustrating right now.
Fortunately, the bulk of what we have doesn't expire, but those that might, we're looking at it.
Yeah, even a little bit, I'm sure there are families that would love to have them.
Yeah, we're looking at it.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Do you have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we off now?